Hello, I'm SeungJeh Chung from IIXL Lab. Today I'll be talking about how we can unlock lost details in 3D Gaussian splatting. This presentation will focus on the paper titled AbsGS, which was published at ACM Multimedia 2024. First, to set the stage, let's briefly define 3D reconstruction. This task concerns the creation of a 3D model from a set of images captured from multiple viewpoints of a real-world scene or object. Then the reconstructed 3D model allows for rendering the scene from viewpoints different from the original input images, a capability commonly referred to as novel view synthesis. Within this field of 3D reconstruction, a method called 3D Gaussian splatting has recently gained significant attention. In simple terms, 3D Gaussian splatting represents a scene using a collection of 3D Gaussian primitives. It has become prominent due to its remarkable training efficiency and its ability to achieve real-time rendering speeds. Additionally, it can achieve the photorealistic quality. Here is a short video clip showing a scene reconstructed with 3D Gaussian splatting. As you can see, the rendered view is highly detailed and can be explored in real time. However, despite these impressive capabilities, 3D Gaussian splatting can sometimes struggle with recovering fine details. If we compare the real-world image on the left with the reconstructed 3D image on the right, particularly in the areas highlighted by the red boxes, we can observe a loss of sharpness or a blurry appearance in certain regions, like the grass. The paper I'm presenting today, AbsGS, analyzes the reasons of this detail loss. It then proposed a straightforward and logical strategy to overcome this limitation. Before we delve into the specifics of AbsGS, let's quickly review the background of the standard pipeline of 3D Gaussian splatting. The process begins with initialization. This step uses multi-view images, which are our ground truth, to generate an initial sparse point cloud, typically using structure from motion (SFM). These points from SFM then serve as the initial positions for our 3D Gaussians. Each Gaussian is allocated with features like covariance, opacity, and color, which will be refined during the learning process. This completes the initialization. Next stage is the rendering process. 3D Gaussian splatting employs a differentiable split-based rasterization process. This involves techniques such as a tile-based rasterizer and alpha blending to compute the final pixel colors. We will not go into the details mechanism of the rasterization here, but the key outcome is the generation of rendered images from the Gaussian scene. The third stage is optimization of the 3D Gaussians. In this step, the rendered images are compared with the ground truth images. A pixel-wise loss, typically a combination of L1 and DSSIM, is calculated. This loss is then backpropagated to update the parameters of the 3D Gaussians. This cycle of rendering and parameter updating is repeated for many learning iterations. Through this iterative process, the initial set of 3D Gaussians is progressively refined. As a result, the entire scene becomes optimized, leading to a high-quality representation, as you can see with the optimized 3D Gaussians on the right. From these, novel views can be effectively synthesized. The final key component in the standard 3D GIS is adaptive density control, called ADC. The initial set of Gaussians is quite sparse, often numbering in the thousands. However, to accurately represent the entire scene with fine details, these need to be expanded into millions of more refined Gaussians. ADC achieves this by adaptively controlling the density of Gaussians at specific intervals during the optimization process. Especially, ADC identifies areas that are either under-reconstructed or over-reconstructed. For under-reconstructed regions, where details are missing and Gaussians are too small or sparse, new Gaussians are often cloned from existing ones. This helps to fill in these gaps. Conversely, for over-reconstructed regions, where a large Gaussian might be trying to represent too much detail inaccurately, that Gaussian is split into smaller ones. These decisions to clone or split are typically guided by the magnitude of the view space positional gradient. If a Gaussian's gradient is high, it means that Gaussian must be modified to better represent the scene, so it becomes a candidate for densification through either cloning or splitting. Now that we have an overview of the standard 3D Gaussian splatting pipeline, let's revisit the problem of lost details more closely. On the left, we see a visualization of the 3D Gaussian primitives that represent the scene. On the right is the corresponding rendered image. If we focus on the highlighted regions, we can observe that in areas where the rendered image shows blurriness and lost details, the underlying Gaussian primitives are often still quite large. This suggests that the ADC process might not be effectively refining or splitting these large Gaussians in problematic regions. So the fundamental question is, what hinders the proper densification of these large, over-reconstructed Gaussians? The primary cause, as identified by the AbsGS paper, is a phenomenon called gradient collision. To understand this, let's first consider a large 3D Gaussian primitive. During the rendering process, this 3D Gaussian is splatted onto the 2D image plane. This projection results in a 2D Gaussian. As illustrated in the central diagram, a single large 2D Gaussian can often cover multiple pixels in the image. Now, for each pixel covered by this 2D Gaussian, a per-pixel positional gradient is computed. This gradient essentially tells us how the rendered color at that pixel would change. Crucially, these per-pixel gradients have both the magnitude and the direction. As you can see in the grid on the right, each pixel might vote for the Gaussian center to move in a different direction to best match the ground truth color for that specific pixel. The overall view space gradient for this Gaussian is then calculated by summing up all these individual per-pixel gradients. This is where the gradient collision happens. Because these per-pixel gradients often point in conflicting directions, their summation can result in an overall gradient with a very small magnitude. Essentially, the conflicting directional votes from the pixels largely cancel each other out. Consequently, this small magnitude of the overall view space gradient often fails to exceed the predefined densification threshold. In 3D Gaussian splitting, a Gaussian is typically densified if the magnitude of its gradient is above this threshold. However, due to the gradient collision, the condition for splitting large Gaussians is not met. As a result, these large Gaussians persist without being refined leading directly to the blurry image. The AbsGS paper also offers a proof by formula for this gradient collision. As shown, the per-pixel positional gradient can be decomposed into three main terms using the chain rule of differentiation, which is fundamental to backpropagation. These terms relate to how color influences loss, how opacity influences color, and how position influences opacity. Crucially, the paper demonstrates that each of these terms can be either positive or negative. This variability in signs means the overall per pixel gradient can have different directions for different pixels, which is the root of the collision. To further illustrate this, the AbsGS paper presents a simple experiment. First, they take a ground truth image and reduce it to a low resolution as shown on the left. Then they attempt to fit this entire low resolution scene using only a single large Gaussian. The rendered output of this single Gaussian is shown in the middle. Finally, on the right, they visualize the sign of the per-pixel gradient for this single large Gaussian. Red pixels indicate a positive gradient in a certain direction, while green pixels indicate a negative gradient. As you can see, even for a single Gaussian covering the scene, the per-pixel gradients have widely varying directions, visually confirming the gradient collision phenomenon. So how does AbsGS address this problem of gradient collision? The solution proposed is called the homodirectional gradient. As we've established, the standard approach sums per pixel gradients, which often have conflicting directions. This leads to a small overall gradient magnitude, often below the densification threshold, so large Gaussians are not split. The core idea of the homodirectional gradient is remarkably simple yet effective. Instead of directly summing the per-pixel gradient, AbsGS first takes the absolute value of each per-pixel gradient before summation. By doing this, as shown in the new diagram, all gradient contributions are forced to be in the same direction. This ensures that even if the original per-pixel gradients had conflicting directions, their magnitudes now add up constructively. The resulting homodirectional gradient now has a significantly larger magnitude. This larger magnitude can now correctly exceed the densification threshold, allowing the over-reconstructed Gaussian to be properly split. Now let's look at the results of this approach. This slide visualizes the Gaussian selected for densification. The top row shows the ground truth, the rendered image with blurry areas, and the underlying ellipsoid for context. The key comparison is the bottom row. Image D shows that the original 3D selects over 60 million Gaussians indicated by the white regions. However, it often fails to target the large, over-constructed areas effectively. In contrast, image E shows the selection by AbsGS. It selected significantly fewer Gaussians, yet the white regions clearly cover the over-reconstructed areas much better. This demonstrates the improved selection for densification achieved by AbsGS. Looking at the final results, we can see a clear improvement. The top row shows the output from the original 3D.js, and the bottom row shows the results from AbsGS. Visually, AbsGS achieves higher quality in the rendered image, with better detail, particularly noticeable in several visual quality scores. Importantly, this improvement is achieved with a comparable number of Gaussian points and memory usage. This confirms that AbsGS successfully recovers lost details and enhances the overall visual fidelity. Thanks for watching.